Now, federal politicians, speaking of the minister, returned to Canberra this week, just days out from voters deciding the fate of the country's sole Liberal government, that one in Tasmania. The latest quarterly essay features what's described as the first in-depth look at the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, and how his leadership is defining the coalition's fortunes. It's been written by author and journalist Lex Lane, who joins us now in the studio. Great to see you.
Yeah, great to be here.
It's a really fascinating piece that you've done. How did you find it, delving into Peter Dutton?
It was pretty fascinating for me. Like, I pay a lot of attention to politics, obviously, write about it a lot, but it's when you really sit down and concentrate on someone and sort of piece together their career that a lot of information which mightn't have seemed as relevant or as interesting earlier in their career, when you piece it all together, it becomes really revealing and kind of interesting, I think, like in a fresh way.
Yeah, well, there's a quote towards the end of the essay where you write, "Dutton is a hard man with a glass jaw. He feels entitled to the highest prize of Australian democracy, yet he resents attention and accountability. His siege mentality gets exhausting. You are with him or at war with him." So, I mean, how much does that, in your view, define his political persona?
A lot. Like, I think if you look at the way that Dutton was elected in 2001, he's a Queensland federal politician, but Queensland has a very different political culture. It has a different media ecosystem to the rest of the country. So it's got one daily newspaper. So you can, if you're a Queensland federal politician coming through, at the start of your career, you're less likely to have that kind of diversity of other media sources. So Dutton's got a very well-documented animosity towards Fairfax, which is now 9 newspapers, and also the ABC, and I think that's one of the manifestations of this siege mentality, which I think a lot of Queensland politicians have. I think Dutton really takes it to the nth degree.
Leading up to the next election, you spoke to some of Mr Dutton's former colleagues, and you write, some Liberals worry that his gung-ho approach, that's how some others put it, lacks the sort of soft touch and the nuance to appeal to voters in urban seats that the Liberals potentially would have to win back at the next election if they were to form government.
Yep.
How concerned are some in the party that there isn't that sort of broad church appeal, perhaps?
I think there is concern. I think that the essay sort of goes through some of Peter Dutton's political strengths as well. So it's not just it's not all weaknesses. Like, he does have some political strengths, and I think if you look at the opposition at the moment, the politician who strikes the most fear into Labor's heart, especially in Parliament, is Peter Dutton. So he's not someone that doesn't have certain political strengths. But Australia, like I come from Queensland, and so I've written a lot about Queensland political culture, and there has been issues for, say, the Labor Party at a federal level appealing to Queensland. And so there's, you can, if you're from Queensland, have tunnel vision for what you need to do to win a state like Queensland. But having lived in Sydney now for a few years, like, it's a very big country, and even Sydney and Melbourne are very different. And if you look at some of the outer suburban seats in Melbourne and Sydney, which is sort of Peter Dutton's target audience, he comes from an outer suburban seat in Brisbane, very different demographics. Some of them have like quite similar ethnic demographics to Dixon in North Brisbane, but some of them are very ethnically diverse, and that's not, multiculturalism is not something that Peter Dutton has sort of like associated himself with throughout his career.
What your essay does confirm is that this man is a paradox. He happily projects this persona politically of a hard man, yet you quote former colleagues, current and former colleagues, who describe him variously, and I'm quoting directly as well from the essay, a listener, a gentleman, a man who rarely loses his temper, not a big noter, and disciplined, you name it. So, I mean, and that's the general theme you're getting from people who know, I guess, the private Peter Dutton.
Yeah, and so that's why when you go behind some of the controversial moments in his career, it's quite interesting, because the perception is kind of formed that he is this chest-beating populist who's just kind of like letting his mask slip on talkback radio. But he's a very careful, cautious sort of individual. So nothing he does is by accident. He's like got a very, very single-minded vision to become the Prime Minister of Australia. And so those, what might otherwise seem like moments where he's kind of just let some steam off, like they're very deliberate actions. And yeah, I think that where we see that push up against is when he gets to a position like the opposition leader, where you aren't just appealing to kind of those narrow sections of the community in terms of people who might listen to certain talkback radio shows. You're actually appealing to a really broad spectrum of Australian society.